The hat tumbled across Main Street like a tumbleweed with purpose, and Josephine McCoy watched from the general store window as the tall cowboy chased after it, his boots kicking up dust with each long stride before a gust of wind sent the worn Stetson careening around the corner and out of sight while he got called back by his companion, leaving empty-handed and clearly frustrated in the scorching Arizona heat of July 1882. Josephine had been in Tombstone for 3 weeks, working at her aunt's boarding house after her parents died of fever back in Missouri, and she recognized the cowboy as one of the ranch hands who came into town every few weeks for supplies. She watched him shake his head, say something to his friend, then mount his horse and ride off toward the south. The hat, she noticed, had wedged itself against a water trough near the livery stable, and something in her chest tightened at the sight of it sitting there, abandoned and alone like she had felt since arriving in this dusty silver mining town where everything seemed harder and hotter and more unforgiving than anything she had known back home. Without thinking too much about why it mattered, Josephine left the store and walked over to retrieve the hat. It was well worn but quality made, the leather band stained with sweat and the crown shaped by years of use. Inside, she found the initials JCH burned into the leather. She brushed off the dust and held it carefully, wondering if the cowboy would come back for it. But as the afternoon wore on and the sun climbed higher, turning the air into something you could almost chew, she realized he probably did not even know where it had ended up. Her Aunt Clara needed flour from the Miller Ranch anyway, and Josephine had overheard the cowboy's friend mention they were headed back to the J-Bar H spread, which she knew was somewhere south of town. She could ask around, find out exactly where, maybe get directions. The thought of that hat sitting in a corner somewhere, forgotten, bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Her father had always said she had too soft a heart for lost things. The next morning, she woke before dawn and told her aunt she would walk out to the J-Bar H to deliver a message and pick up that flour order. Clara looked at her like she had suggested swimming to California, her weathered face creasing with concern in the lamplight of the kitchen where they prepared breakfast for the boarders. "That is 5 miles at least, girl," Clara said, cracking eggs into a cast-iron skillet. "In this heat. You will collapse before you get halfway." "I am stronger than I look," Josephine replied, which was true enough. Farm life in Missouri had not been easy, and she had walked plenty of miles behind a plow horse. "I will take water and leave early before it gets too hot." Clara studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You have your mother's stubborn streak. That hat must belong to someone special for you to go through all this trouble." Josephine felt her cheeks warm, but she shook her head. "I just think a man should have his hat back." It looked important, well cared for. She packed 2 canteens of water, some bread and dried meat, and tucked the hat carefully into a cloth sack to protect it from the dust. The sun was just breaking over the Dragoon Mountains when she set out, following the south road that the clerk at the general store had described in detail the evening before, when she had casually asked about the J-Bar H ranch. He had looked at her curiously but told her to follow the main road for 3 miles, then turn west at the old lightning-struck cottonwood, and the ranch would be another 2 miles past that. The morning started cool enough, almost pleasant, and Josephine made good time on the hard-packed road. A freight wagon passed her going the opposite direction, the driver tipping his hat, and she waved back, feeling adventurous and independent in a way she had not felt since leaving Missouri. The landscape here was so different from home, all scrub brush and cactus and distant mountains that looked purple in the early light, beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way that made her heart ache with something she could not quite name. By the time she reached the lightning-struck cottonwood, the sun had climbed high enough to start pressing down on her shoulders like a hot iron. She drank from one canteen and adjusted her bonnet, studying the narrow dirt track that led west through a gap in the hills. This was ranch land now, open range dotted with cattle in the distance, and she could see the shimmer of heat already rising from the ground in wavering lines that made everything look like it was underwater. The second part of the journey was harder. The road was rougher, just 2 ruts really, and there was no shade anywhere. Just the endless blue sky and the sun burning down like it had a personal grudge against anything foolish enough to be out walking at mid-morning. Josephine's dress stuck to her back with sweat, and her feet started to hurt in her button-up boots that had seemed practical enough back in town, but now felt like they were made of wood and nails. She drank more water, rationing it carefully, and kept walking. The hat in her sack seemed to grow heavier with each step, and she started to wonder if maybe her aunt had been right, if this was a foolish errand born of loneliness and the need to feel useful, to feel like she mattered to someone even if that someone was a stranger who had lost his hat. But she had come this far, and Josephine McCoy had never been one to turn back once she set her mind to something, a trait her father had praised and her mother had worried over in equal measure. The heat became something alive, pressing against her from all sides, and she had to stop twice more to rest in the minimal shade of some scrubby mesquite trees that looked like they were barely hanging on to life themselves. Her second canteen was half empty when she finally crested a low rise and saw the ranch buildings in the valley below. A collection of weathered wood structures clustered around a main house with a covered porch, corrals full of horses, and a windmill turning slowly in the hot breeze. Relief flooded through her, giving her tired legs new strength, and she hurried down the slope toward the ranch, her boots slipping a little on the loose rocks. She was maybe 100 yards from the main house when a man stepped out of the barn, and even at this distance, she recognized him as the cowboy from town, tall and lean in dusty work clothes, a bandana tied around his neck and his dark hair bare to the sun. He noticed her at the same moment, his hand coming up to shade his eyes, and she saw him go still with surprise. Then he was walking toward her quickly, his long legs covering the ground fast, and as he got closer she could see the concern on his sun-browned face, the strong line of his jaw rough with stubble, and eyes that were the color of whiskey in sunlight, amber and warm and currently filled with worry. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he called out when he was close enough. "Did your horse throw you? Are you hurt?" Josephine stopped walking, suddenly aware of how she must look, dusty and sweating and swaying slightly on her feet. Her throat felt like sandpaper when she tried to speak, and she had to swallow twice before words would come. "I am fine," she managed, though her voice came out raspy and thin. "I walked from town. I have your hat." He stared at her like she had spoken in a foreign language, his eyes widening. "You walked from Tombstone in this heat?" She nodded and fumbled with the cloth sack, pulling out his Stetson and holding it out to him. "It blew away yesterday. I saw where it landed and I thought you might want it back." For a moment he just looked at the hat, then at her, then back at the hat, his expression cycling through confusion and disbelief and something else she could not quite read. Then he took the hat carefully from her hands and immediately tossed it aside onto a nearby fence post, which shocked her until she realized he was reaching for her arm, his hand warm and calloused against her elbow, steadying her. "Come on," he said, his voice urgent but gentle. "You need to get out of this sun right now and you need water. Can you walk a little farther?" "I have been walking for 3 hours," Josephine said, and maybe it was the heat or the exhaustion or the way he was looking at her like she mattered, but she felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. "I think I can manage a few more steps." His mouth quirked in something that was not quite a smile, worried but touched with admiration. "You are either the bravest woman I have ever met or the most foolish. I have not decided which yet." He kept his hand on her arm as he guided her toward the house, calling out as they approached. "Rosie, Rosie, bring water and a cool cloth, quick." A Mexican woman in her 50s appeared on the porch, took one look at Josephine, and disappeared back inside, returning moments later with a pitcher and a basin. The cowboy helped Josephine up the steps and into a chair on the shaded porch, and the relief of being out of the direct sun was so profound she felt dizzy with it. Drink slow, he said, kneeling in front of her and pressing a tin cup into her hands. Not too fast or you will get sick. The water was cool and sweet, probably from a deep well, and Josephine had never tasted anything so good in her entire life. She drank it down, and he immediately refilled the cup, watching her with those amber eyes that seemed to see right through to all the lonely, broken parts of her she tried to keep hidden. Rosie fussed over her, pressing a cool, damp cloth to her forehead and neck, clucking her tongue and muttering in rapid Spanish that Josephine could not follow but understood the tone of perfectly. It was the universal sound of a woman dealing with foolishness and bravery in equal measure. "What is your name?" the cowboy asked, still kneeling there in front of her like a supplicant at an altar. "Josephine McCoy," she said. "I work at the boarding house in town for my Aunt Clara." "James Harrison," he said. "This is my family's ranch." "And you walked 5 miles in 100-degree heat to return my hat." When he said it like that, it did sound remarkably foolish, and Josephine felt color rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "It seemed important. It was well made, and I thought you might be missing it." Something shifted in his expression, softening it, and he shook his head slowly. "Miss McCoy, I have lost 3 hats in the last 2 years to wind or stampedes or general carelessness. I can buy another hat. I cannot fathom why you would risk sunstroke and exhaustion to bring it back to me." "Maybe I am foolish then," she said quietly, meeting his eyes. "I just knew what it felt like to be lost and not have anyone come looking, and I could not stand the thought of your hat feeling that way." The words came out before she could stop them, too honest and raw, and she saw understanding dawn in his face, saw him recognize the grief and loneliness she carried. His hand, which had been resting on the arm of her chair, moved to cover hers where it lay in her lap, warm and solid and real. "You are not foolish," he said firmly. "You are kind, and that is rarer than gold out here." Rosie made a satisfied sound and patted Josephine's shoulder, then headed back into the house, leaving them alone on the porch. James stayed where he was, kneeling in front of her, his hand still covering hers, and Josephine felt something crack open in her chest, some wall she had built up since her parents died, since she had come west to this hard, beautiful country where nothing was certain and everything was sharp edges. "You should rest here for a while," James said. "Until the worst of the heat passes. I will drive you back to town in the wagon this evening when it cools down. Your aunt must be worried sick." "She thinks I was coming for flour," Josephine admitted. "She does not know about the hat." "She would have locked me in my room if she knew what I was planning." James laughed at that, a warm, rich sound that made something flutter in her stomach. "Smart woman, your aunt. You should listen to her more often." "Probably," Josephine agreed, "but then I would not have met you properly." The words hung between them, charged with meaning, and she saw his eyes darken slightly, his thumb moving against the back of her hand in a gesture that was probably unconscious but sent shivers up her arm despite the heat. "I noticed you in town yesterday," James said quietly. "At the general store window. I wanted to come over and introduce myself, but my friend Charlie was in a hurry to get back, and then my damned hat blew away and I lost my chance." "So maybe it was fate," Josephine said, then felt embarrassed by the romanticism of it. "Or just wind and foolishness." "I am going to choose to believe in fate," James said, standing up but not letting go of her hand. "Come inside where it is cooler. Rosie will feed you, because that is what she does, and you can rest in the parlor. Then later, if you feel up to it, I will show you around the ranch before we head back to town." The inside of the house was dim and cool, thick adobe walls keeping out the worst of the heat, and Josephine found herself in a comfortable parlor with worn furniture and Navajo rugs on the wood floor. True to James's prediction, Rosie appeared with a plate of food, cold chicken and bread and some kind of bean salad, and hovered until Josephine ate every bite while James sat in the chair across from her, watching her with an expression that made her feel seen in a way she had not felt in months. "Have you always lived in Arizona?" she asked, wanting to know everything about him suddenly, hungry for details. "Born right here on this ranch," James said. My father came out in '58, bought this land when it was nothing but dirt and dreams, built it up from scratch. He died 2 years ago, left it to me and my brother, but my brother wanted city life, went to San Francisco. So it is just me now, me and Rosie and 6 hired hands. That sounds lonely, Josephine said softly. It was, James agreed. Until about 4 hours ago, when a crazy, brave, beautiful woman walked 5 miles through hell to bring me back my hat. Josephine's breath caught at the word beautiful, at the way he was looking at her like she was something precious he had been searching for without knowing it. You barely know me. I might be terrible. You walked 5 miles in killing heat to return something to a stranger, James said. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. The rest is just details we can learn as we go. As we go where? Josephine asked, her heart beating faster. James leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes locked on hers. Wherever this goes, if you want. I know this is fast and I know we just met, but I am 30 years old and I have learned not to waste time when something feels right. And this feels right, Josephine. You walking onto my ranch today feels like the first right thing that has happened in a long time. She should have been scared by the intensity of it, by the way he was laying his heart out after knowing her for less than an hour, but instead she felt relief flood through her, felt the answering rightness in her own chest. I am 22, she said. I have been alone since March when my parents died. I came out here because I had nowhere else to go, and I have been feeling lost ever since, like I do not fit anywhere. But sitting here talking to you, I do not feel lost anymore. Then stay found, James said simply. Stay here for the afternoon. Let me show you the ranch, introduce you to the horses. We will talk and get to know each other, and then I will take you home proper. And tomorrow, if you want, I will come calling at your aunt's boarding house like a gentleman. We will do this right. Josephine smiled, feeling it light up her whole face. I would like that. I would like that very much. They spent the afternoon together, and it felt like something out of a dream, the kind of perfect interlude that life rarely offered. James showed her the ranch, the horses in the corrals that came to him like old friends, the barn cats that wound around his legs, the view from the top of the rise where you could see all the way to the mountains. He told her stories about growing up here, about his father's dreams and his own hopes for the future, and she told him about Missouri, about her parents, about the small, brave life she was trying to build in Tombstone. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easy as water, and Josephine realized she was laughing more than she had in months, that the tight knot of grief in her chest was loosening with every smile he drew from her. James had a quiet humor, a way of seeing the world that was both practical and optimistic, and she found herself drawn to him, to the way he looked at her like she was the most interesting person he had ever met. As the afternoon shadows grew long and the heat finally began to ease, James hitched up a wagon and helped Josephine onto the bench seat, his hands firm on her waist, lingering a moment longer than necessary. He retrieved his hat from the fence post where he had tossed it hours earlier, looked at it for a moment, then placed it carefully on his head. Best hat I ever owned, he said with a grin. Survived wind, weather, and 5 miles of desperate rescue. I am never losing this one again. The drive back to Tombstone took a little over an hour in the wagon, and they talked the whole way, James pointing out landmarks and Josephine asking questions about ranching that he answered with patience and obvious pleasure. The sun was setting when they rolled into town, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible, too beautiful to be real. James pulled the wagon up in front of her aunt's boarding house, and Josephine could see Clara standing on the porch, her face a mixture of relief and exasperation. Before she could climb down, James touched her arm, stopping her. I meant what I said earlier, he told her quietly. About calling on you tomorrow, about wanting to see where this goes. I meant what I said too, Josephine replied, about not feeling lost anymore. He smiled at that, a slow, warm smile that made her insides turn to honey, and then he jumped down and came around to help her from the wagon, his hands strong and sure on her waist as he lifted her down. For a moment they stood there close together, the air between them charged with possibility, and then Clara was hurrying down the steps and James was stepping back, putting proper distance between them. "Josephine McCoy, you have some explaining to do," Clara said, but her eyes were on James, assessing and sharp. "And who might you be?" "James Harrison, ma'am," he said, pulling off his hat respectfully. "From the J-Bar-H ranch south of here. Your niece did me a great kindness today, and I wanted to make sure she got home safely." Clara looked between them, and Josephine could see the moment her aunt understood what was happening, saw the calculation in her eyes shift to cautious approval. "I see. Well, Mr. Harrison, I hope you will stay for supper as thanks for seeing her home." "I would be honored, ma'am," James said, "but I need to get back to the ranch before full dark. However, I would like to call on Miss McCoy tomorrow evening if that would be acceptable to you both." "I think that would be just fine," Clara said, and Josephine felt her heart soar. "Say around 6 o'clock. After the supper rush, 6 o'clock, James agreed. He looked at Josephine and she saw everything in his eyes, all the promise and hope and barely restrained feeling. "Until tomorrow then, Miss McCoy, thank you again for bringing back my hat. It means more than you know." "Until tomorrow, Mr. Harrison," she said formally. But her smile was anything but formal, and she saw his eyes light up in response before he climbed back into the wagon and drove away, looking back once to wave before disappearing around the corner. Clara waited until he was out of sight before turning to Josephine with raised eyebrows. "You walked 5 miles to return his hat?" "Yes," Josephine said simply. "And he drove you home and is calling on you tomorrow?" "Yes." Clara studied her for a long moment, then shook her head with a small smile. "Your mother would have done the exact same thing. She walked 7 miles through a snowstorm once to bring your father his lunch pail he left behind. He proposed a week later." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes at the mention of her parents, but they were good tears, bittersweet but warm. "I miss them so much." "I know, honey," Clara said, pulling her into a hug, "but I think they would be happy to know you found someone who looks at you the way that Cowboy does. Like you hung the moon and stars just for him." That night, Josephine lay in bed in the small room under the eaves, too excited to sleep, replaying every moment of the day in her mind. Her feet hurt and her skin felt tight from the sun despite her bonnet, but none of that mattered compared to the warmth that filled her chest when she thought about James, about the way he had looked at her, the things he had said, the promise of tomorrow. James came calling the next evening right at 6 o'clock, cleaned up and wearing a pressed shirt, his hat in his hands and a bouquet of wildflowers clutched in the other. Josephine met him at the door in her best dress, a blue calico that brought out her eyes, and the way his face lit up when he saw her made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the territory. They sat on the porch swing, properly chaperoned by Clara, who sat in the window with her mending, and talked until the stars came out. James told her more about the ranch, about his plans to expand the herd, about the life he was building, and Josephine talked about her dreams. Small dreams maybe, but important to her, about having a home and a family and a place where she belonged. "I would like you to belong at the J-Bar-H," James said quietly, so quietly that Clara could not hear from her spot by the window. "I know it is too soon to say such things, but I have always been honest, and I want you to know what I am thinking, what I am hoping for." "It does not feel too soon to me," Josephine whispered back. "It feels like coming home." He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together in the shadows where Clara could not see, and they sat like that for a long time, just being together, feeling the rightness of it settle into their bones. James came calling 3 more times that week, then 4 times the next week, and by the end of July, it was understood by everyone in Tombstone that Josephine McCoy and James Harrison were courting seriously. He took her on picnics in the cooler evening hours, showed her the best places to watch the sunset, introduced her to his ranch hands who teased him mercilessly but treated her with perfect respect. She cooked for him sometimes, bringing dishes out to the ranch, and Rosie declared her kitchen skills acceptable, which James told her was the highest praise possible. They talked about everything, learning each other's histories and hopes, and every conversation made Josephine more certain that this was right, that James was right, that the life she could have with him was everything she had ever wanted without knowing it. He was kind and hardworking, honest and steady, but there was also humor in him and passion barely restrained, and the way he kissed her finally one evening under the cottonwood tree near the ranch made her understand why people wrote poems about love. "Marry me," James said against her lips, his hands framing her face like she was something precious and breakable. "I know it has only been 6 weeks, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Marry me, Josephine, make the ranch your home, make me the luckiest man in Arizona." "Yes," she breathed, kissing him again, feeling joy bubble up in her chest like champagne. "Yes, James, yes." They were married in September, a simple ceremony in the small church in Tombstone with Clara and Rosie and the ranch hands in attendance. And Josephine wore her mother's wedding dress that Clara had carefully preserved and brought west. James looked at her like she was a miracle when she walked down the aisle, and when he slid the simple gold band onto her finger, she felt her parents watching somehow, felt their blessing in the warm breeze that came through the open church doors. The ranch became her home, and she threw herself into learning everything about it, about the cattle and horses, about the harsh, beautiful land that surrounded them. Rosie taught her to cook the foods James loved, and Josephine taught Rosie to read English in return, the two women becoming friends and then something closer, family built from choice rather than blood. The ranch hands accepted her as the boss's wife, and then as the boss herself when she proved she could handle the accounts and negotiate with buyers as well as any man. James loved her fiercely, completely, with a steadiness that made her feel safe and a passion that made her feel alive. They worked the ranch together, building the future his father had dreamed of, and when things were hard, when drought or cattle prices or the 100 other challenges of ranching pressed down on them, they faced it together, united. Their first son was born in June of 1883, a healthy boy with his father's amber eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him Thomas, after Josephine's father, and James cried when she told him the name she had chosen, understanding what it meant to her to honor her parents this way. Tom was barely walking when Josephine found herself pregnant again, and in 1885 they welcomed a daughter they named Claire for Josephine's mother, a tiny perfect thing with dark curls and a smile that could charm birds from trees. The ranch prospered under their management, growing from 6 hands to 12, the herds expanding, their reputation for quality cattle spreading across the territory. James bought more land, and they built a new wing onto the house, rooms for the children and one for Clara, who moved out from town when her boarding house became too much to manage alone. The house filled with laughter and love, with the sounds of family, and sometimes Josephine would stand on the porch in the evening and marvel at the life she had built, at how a simple act of kindness had led to everything she held dear. "What are you thinking about?" James asked one evening, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. "Your hat," Josephine said, leaning back against him. "How I walked 5 miles in the heat to return it to you, and you gave me water and your heart. Best trade I ever made," James murmured, kissing the side of her neck. "Though I still think you were crazy to walk that far in that heat." "Crazy or not, it brought me to you," Josephine said, turning in his arms to face him. "I would walk 100 miles through fire if I knew you would be waiting at the end. You will never have to," James said seriously, cupping her face in his hands. "Because I will always come looking for you first. You will never be lost again, Josephine, I promise you that." She kissed him then, deep and sweet, tasting home and forever in his lips. And in the house behind them, she could hear Clara singing to the children, could hear Rosie moving around the kitchen preparing supper, all the sounds of the life they had created together. As the years passed, the J-Bar-H became known as one of the finest ranches in southern Arizona. But to Josephine, it was simply home, the place where she belonged, where she was loved completely. They had 2 more children, another son in 1888 and a final daughter in 1890. And the house rang with noise and joy and the beautiful chaos of a large family. Tom grew tall like his father and took to ranching like he was born to it, while Claire had her mother's soft heart and spent hours rescuing injured animals and nursing them back to health. James's hat, the one Josephine had walked 5 miles to return, hung on a peg by the door, worn but treasured. He refused to replace it, said it was lucky, said it had brought him everything that mattered. Sometimes Josephine would see him pause and touch it on his way out, a small gesture of gratitude for the wind that had blown it away, for the woman who had brought it back, for all the love and life that had grown from that one moment of connection. In the spring of 1895, when Tom was 12 and already working alongside his father with the cattle, James took Josephine up to their favorite spot on the rise overlooking the ranch. It was a place they came to often over the years, a place where they could be alone together, where they had shared dreams and fears and countless kisses under the wide Arizona sky. "You remember that first day?" James asked, his arm around her waist as they looked out over the land that had become theirs, at the house and barns and corrals, at the cattle grazing in the distance and the windmill turning slowly in the breeze. "When you came walking up that road looking half dead from heat exhaustion, holding my hat like it was treasure. I remember thinking you had the kindest eyes I had ever seen," Josephine said. "And I remember feeling like I had finally found where I was supposed to be. I fell in love with you the moment you said you could not stand the thought of my hat feeling lost," James said, turning her to face him. "I had never met anyone who could see loss in an object, who had that much compassion in their heart. I knew right then you were extraordinary." "I was scared," Josephine admitted. "Scared you would think I was insane, scared I had made a terrible mistake walking all that way, scared you would laugh at me." "I could never laugh at kindness," James said, "at love in action. You walked 5 miles through killing heat to bring something back to a stranger, and you changed my whole life by doing it. You saved me, Josephine, from loneliness, from a half-lived existence. You made everything better just by being brave enough to care." She felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears, the kind that came from being truly seen and truly loved. "You saved me too. I was drowning in grief when I came west, and you gave me a reason to live again. You gave me everything." They stood there together as the sun set, painting the world in shades of amber and gold, and Josephine thought about fate and chance and all the small moments that led to the big ones. A hat blown by wind, a woman who cared about lost things, a cowboy who recognized something precious when he saw it. Such small beginnings for such a magnificent life. That evening, after supper when the children were playing outside and Clara was knitting in her chair by the fire and Rosie was humming in the kitchen, James pulled Josephine into the parlor and kissed her like he had that first time under the cottonwood tree, with passion and promise and the certainty of forever. "I love you," he said against her lips. "More than anything in this world, you are the best thing that ever happened to me." "I love you too," Josephine whispered back. "Thank you for giving me water when I needed it. Thank you for giving me your heart." "It was always yours," James said. "From the moment you appeared on my ranch holding my hat and looking at me with those blue eyes full of hope and determination. You claimed my heart that day, Josephine Harrison, and I have never wanted it back." As the years continued to unfold, their love only deepened, weathering the challenges that life brought with grace and strength born from their unity. The children grew and thrived, each finding their own path, but all choosing to stay connected to the ranch that was their heritage. Tom married a schoolteacher from Tucson in 1901 and brought her home to the J-Bar-H, building a house just over the rise from his parents. And soon there were grandchildren running through Josephine's kitchen, filling it with the same laughter her own children had brought. Claire became a veterinarian, one of the first women in the territory to do so, and she set up practice in Tombstone but visited the ranch every week, her gentle hands healing animals throughout the region. The younger children found their own ways, but all of them carried the lessons their parents had taught them about kindness, about seeing the value in lost things, about loving fiercely and completely. James and Josephine aged together, their hair going gray, their hands growing weathered from years of work. But their love remained as strong as it had been that first day on the porch when he had given her water and looked at her like she was a miracle. They still sat on the porch swing in the evenings, still rode out to watch the sunset from their special place on the rise, still kissed like young lovers even when they were old enough to have earned every wrinkle and scar. On their 25th anniversary in 1908, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were children and grandchildren everywhere, tables groaning with food, music and dancing and joy spilling out into the warm September evening. James stood up to make a speech, his amber eyes finding Josephine across the crowded yard, and the love in his gaze was so profound that several of the women started crying before he even said a word. 25 years ago, James said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, a brave, crazy, beautiful woman walked 5 miles through heat that should have killed her to return my hat. I thought she was insane. I thought she was the most remarkable person I had ever met. Turns out I was right about both things. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Josephine felt her cheeks warm with pleasure and embarrassment. I gave her water that day because it was the decent thing to do, James continued, but I gave her my heart because I could not help myself. She walked into my life carrying something I had lost, and she never left. She built this ranch with me, raised our children, created a home that is full of love and laughter and everything good in this world. She is my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. Josephine, every single day with you has been a gift. Here is to 25 more years, and then 25 after that, and forever beyond. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Josephine made her way through the press of family and friends to her husband's side. He pulled her close and kissed her soundly, not caring that their children were groaning in mock embarrassment and the grandchildren were giggling, and Josephine kissed him back with all the love in her heart. Later, when the party had wound down and the guests had gone home and the house was quiet again, they walked up to their spot on the rise one more time. The stars were brilliant overhead, the Milky Way a river of light across the black sky, and the land stretched out around them in silvery moonlight, beautiful and peaceful and theirs. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked quietly. "Walking all that way in the heat, tying your life to mine." Josephine looked at him in astonishment. "Regret it? James, it was the best decision I ever made. That walk brought me to you, brought me to this life, brought me home. I would do it again 1,000 times and never regret a single step." "I just want to make sure you are happy," he said, pulling her close. "That has always been my main goal, your happiness." "I am so happy I can barely stand it sometimes," Josephine said honestly. "When I look at our children, our grandchildren, this ranch we built together, this life we have lived, I am overwhelmed with gratitude. You gave me everything, James. A home, a family, a love that has sustained me through every challenge. You gave me a reason to live again when I thought I had lost everything. How could I ever regret that?" He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, tender and loving. "I am the lucky one, Josephine. You saved me, from myself, from loneliness, from a life half-lived. You are my miracle." "We saved each other," Josephine said firmly. "That is what love does. It makes both people better, stronger, more complete." They stood there under the stars, holding each other, and Josephine thought about all the years behind them and all the years still to come. She thought about the hat that had started it all, still hanging by the door, a symbol of fate and fortune and the beautiful accidents that lead to destinies. She thought about the girl she had been, walking 5 miles through brutal heat to return something to a stranger, not knowing she was walking toward her future, toward the love of her life, toward everything she had ever wanted. "Thank you," James whispered against her hair. "For being brave enough to walk those 5 miles, for caring about a lost hat, for seeing something worth saving in a lonely cowboy with more dreams than sense." "Thank you for giving me water," Josephine whispered back, "for giving me your heart, for loving me so completely that I never feel lost anymore." They walked back to the house hand in hand, their shadows long in the moonlight, and when they reached the porch, James paused to touch his old hat hanging by the door, that same small gesture of gratitude he had made thousands of times over the years. Josephine smiled and led him inside, into the home they had built together, into the life that had grown from seeds planted on a hot Arizona day when kindness and love and fate had all conspired to bring two lonely souls together. The years continued to pass in the way they do, marked by seasons and celebrations, by hard work and harvest, by the steady accumulation of memories that make up a life well lived. James and Josephine grew old together with grace, their love deepening into something profound and unshakable, the kind of partnership that inspired everyone who knew them. In the spring of 1920, when they had been married 37 years and Josephine was 59 and James was 67, they sat together on the porch swing in the evening as they had done countless times before. Tom was running the ranch now, running it well, and they were able to enjoy a slower pace, more time together, more moments to appreciate the life they had built. "I was thinking today about that first day," Josephine said, her head resting on James's shoulder. "About walking up the road to the ranch, so hot I could barely see straight, wondering if I had lost my mind." "Best day of my life," James said, his arm around her, his hand playing with the silver hair at her temple. "The day my life really started." "Mine too," Josephine agreed. "Everything good came from that day. Everything I love, everything I treasure, all of it traces back to that moment when I decided to walk 5 miles to return a hat to a stranger." "Not a stranger," James corrected gently. "The man who was waiting for you. The man who had been waiting his whole life without knowing it." She turned to kiss him, soft and sweet, and even after all these years the touch of his lips still made her heart flutter like a girl's. "I love you, James Harrison, more with every passing year." "I love you, Josephine Harrison," he said. "More than words can say. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They sat together as the stars came out, watching the ranch settle into night, and Josephine felt nothing but peace and contentment and profound gratitude. She had walked 5 miles through heat and hardship to return a lost hat, and in exchange she had been given water and love, and a life beyond her wildest dreams. She had found her home, her family, her purpose, all because she had been brave enough to care about something that seemed small but turned out to be everything. The hat still hung by the door, weathered now beyond all recognition but precious beyond measure. Their children and grandchildren all knew the story, told and retold until it became legend. The tale of how their grandmother had walked 5 miles through brutal heat to return grandfather's hat, and how he had fallen in love with her on sight. It was a story about kindness and courage, about love and fate, about the small moments that change everything. And when James and Josephine finally passed, many years later and peacefully in their sleep within months of each other, as longtime loves often do, the hat was placed in a glass case in the ranch house parlor, a memorial to the day two souls found each other and built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would look at it and remember, would tell the story to the next generation, would keep alive the memory of a woman brave enough to walk through fire for a stranger, and a cowboy wise enough to recognize a miracle when she appeared on his doorstep. It was a love story written in dust and heat, in water and kindness, in years of partnership and devotion. It was the story of how Josephine walked 5 miles in the heat to return a lost hat, and how James gave her water and his heart in return, and how from that single moment of connection grew a love that sustained them through everything. A love that proved that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness lead to the greatest destinies, and that home is not a place but a person, and that person is worth walking any distance to find.